let's talk about the super sexy debt ceiling.
Let's do it. Let's do it. We know that the debt ceiling has just been such a tease recently. I mean, they keep telling us like, hey, I have a deal for you. And then they show us the deal and it's dog shit.
Ew. I mean, or somebody might be into that. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum.
I will yuck that yum. Sorry. Anyways, great transition. Let's talk about the debt ceiling. So I know that we've already talked about the debt ceiling. I want to talk more specifically about the negotiation between Democrats and Republicans, between the House of Representatives, which is controlled by Republicans, and the White House, about a deal to prevent a default on our debt, which, just to give you a little bit of a refresher, the United States is going to hit the debt ceiling on June 1st. And if that happens, it will almost certainly lead to this massive recession in the United States.
A recession here? In this economy?
This is not your father's recession, though. This is.
I'm sorry, but I don't think our fathers had to go through, technically they went through the same recessions, but not in a short a period of time.
The point is, this would put us into unprecedented territory, and economists are warning that a default on the United States debt would have major economic consequences and of almost an apocalyptic proportion. And the thing is, this fight does not need to be happening. You would think that raising the debt ceiling, meaning the amount of money that the United States government is allowed to borrow, you'd think that that would just be a no-brainer. But of course, Republicans are using it as a bargaining chip because at this point, it's kind of their only leverage to get their agenda passed. Now, because they control the House, they can prevent the Democratic agenda from being passed, but if they want to get any of their horrific agenda passed, this is the only leverage they have. But the problem is, the leverage that they're using basically amounts to holding the entire United States economy hostage, risking an economic disaster in order to achieve horrific means.
I mean, you can't say you're surprised. Remember when they were talking to us about like the government shutdown, and they were like, but literally no government officials would ever let that happen because that would like be awful. Yeah. And then Ted Cruz was like, hold my beer.
Yeah. And just a reminder, this is different from a government shutdown.
I do understand. I just meant they will press the button and kill us all just for funsies.
Yeah, basically. So I just want to be very clear as I'm going through this that any Republican that tries to make this about, oh no, we're just trying to do this negotiation because we care about responsible spending, they're lying. They are lying. We are hitting that debt ceiling, like whether there's a deal or not. We are hitting that debt ceiling, whether there's spending or not, because we have a deficit. And there is no way you are going to take away that deficit overnight. And on top of that, the budget for this fiscal year has already been decided. This just means that we're going to hit the point where we don't have any more debt to borrow. But the things that are going to be passed, the things that we're currently paying for, are things that we've basically already agreed to pay for.
Quick question. Can we solve this if we bail out more corporations, raise taxes on the lower class, and spend more money with the DOD? Is that the solution? I'm just spitballing some things. Is that the solution?
I mean, you're actually not that far off from Kevin McCarthy's. I mean, he's okay. So Kevin McCarthy's current proposal, I just want to walk you through this. And first, I want to go through the facts of this, and then I want to walk you through how truly horrific all of this is.
And then I will weep.
So, the proposal that Republicans have made is to basically cut the current budget to the level that it was in 2022. Basically, what that means is that there's no adjustment for inflation.
Well, having been to the grocery store recently, I can tell you inflation's actually not that bad. Sorry, I didn't say that.
Yeah. So here's what that means. All right. Overall, the deal that McCarthy put on the table was a $3.6 trillion cut over the next 10 years. And this is specifically cuts to discretionary spending. Now, we've talked about the difference between mandatory and discretionary spending in the past. Remember, mandatory spending are basically sets of spending where they're defined. All right. And in order to change them, you have to pass some type of legislation in order to change them. Discretionary spending is something that basically needs to be renewed every year. So the way that this would work is that with a $3.6 trillion over 10 years cut to our discretionary spending budget, programs such as housing, childcare, social services, public health, education, college student aid, job training would be cut. Now, here's the thing. Military, national defense is part of discretionary spending, but they've stipulated...
Veterans benefits are going to be saved, right?
Well, they've stipulated that veterans benefits are going to be saved. They've stipulated that defense that the defense budget is going to be saved. But what that means is that in order to fulfill that $3.6 trillion number, they're going to have to cut even more from the other programs. And again, I just like to point out, like, this should really tell you all you need to know about the Republican Party. And actually, not even just the Republican Party, but just how fucked up our politics are right now. Because the priority is always, when it comes to cuts, that defense is off the table. We're never going to cut defense. We're never going to cut defense. And that is for both Democrats and Republicans. They've consistently raised the military budget almost every single year. And right now, we have a military budget of $877 billion, which is more than the next 10 countries combined. It is more than China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and Ukraine combined.
I just think that you fail to recognize how difficult it's been to like account for drone strikes on children and civilians in other countries because of inflation. Nathan, they have to do something.
Yeah. So the Republicans keep talking about how unsustainable this current level of spending is, this current deficit is. But they're completely unwilling to cut national defense, which is a bloated budget. Like, you could, if you cut it to like half of what it was, we would still have significantly more than the next country, which is China. We would still have significantly more than China and Russia combined. If we cut our military budget in half, our two biggest rivals, we would still have more than both of them combined. And most of those other countries that I read that are a part of those top 10 countries are fucking allies. Saudi Arabia is an ally. Maybe they shouldn't be, but they are. United Kingdom is an ally. Germany is an ally. France is an ally. South Korea, Japan, Ukraine. Like, most of them are our allies to begin with. But of course, that's always off the table. And again, I'd like to remind you, that is because of the military-industrial complex. It's because we have legalized bribery in this country where there are these defense lobbyists that are going into Congress telling them what they can and cannot vote for, and when they do their bidding, they give them campaign contributions, or, you know, in many cases they give them a cozy lobbying job after they're out of Congress. It is complete corruption, but that is off the table. You know what else is off the table? Tax increase for billionaires. That was a proposal that Biden gave.
Someone think of the billionaires?
Yeah. That was something that Biden proposed. He was like, "Well, if you actually care about reducing the deficit, then here, let's raise taxes on billionaires."
Out of them.
And of course, that's off the table because who do the Republicans represent? It's not the American people. It's not average everyday Americans. It's not the working class. It is billionaires. The billionaires that fund their campaigns.
It is also worth noting, which again, I feel like we all intuitively understand this, but billionaires do not stimulate the economy. In fact, very, very, very wealthy, like the high echelons of wealth, do not stimulate the economy because they keep their money and they really just live off of such a small proportion of their wealth that constantly refeeds itself. They're not stimulating their economy. They're not putting money really into anything.
Yeah.
It just stays with them. It's like a sticky machine. It's like they're covered in glue and money pours at them, but it doesn't come off.
Yeah. Yeah. So instead of cutting military, which they should, instead of taxing billionaires, which they should, which by the way, we don't even have to do any of this stuff. We don't have to do, like, ideally we should be doing it, but in order to avoid a default, we don't even necessarily have to do any of that stuff. They're the ones that are talking about fiscal responsibility, and Biden is proposing, well, here's a way to decrease the deficit. You're going to take it? Of course they're fucking not going to take it. But the point is that we don't even have to do any of this type of stuff. But because they have said that their priority is to try to cut from the deficit, instead of trying to cut our bloated military budget or tax billionaires, here's what they want to do. They want to reduce benefits for WIC,
which is for children and pregnant people.
Women's, infant, and children.
The pro-life party. Okay, cool.
The SNAP program, this would cut 5 million participants from WIC and 1 million for older adults on SNAP.
The older people. Yeah.
1 million people on SNAP.
This from the party that said, listen,
cut.
Y'all, if grandpa's got to die from COVID, grandpa's got to die from COVID.
Yeah. It would force cuts to housing assistance, which would harm families. It would harm older adults, and it would absolutely harm people with disabilities. And in the end, it would affect 2 million people that are receiving rental assistance, 1.6 million people that are currently in public housing. And by the way, all of this is broken down by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. They did a really great breakdown of this. And then 119,000 fewer people would receive services through the Homeless Assistance Program. So fuck the homeless people.
Just to remind people that when someone is experiencing homelessness, it really makes it almost impossible to get a job. Makes it almost impossible to keep up with like medical needs. And it's one of the hardest things to overcome.
Yeah.
It just to remind people that is pushing you really, really deeply into like this impoverished circumstance that's a lot more difficult to get out of.
Yeah. Also, this would cut from schools and transit, federal funding for schools and transit, which is estimated to cost states roughly $1.3 trillion.
Cool. Hope you like schlepping your kid to school. Doesn't matter if you have a job in the mornings.
Yeah. They've also proposed work requirements for health coverage. So for Medicaid programs, this would end up putting 10 million people in Medicaid expansion states at risk of losing significant coverage. So 10 million people potentially losing their health care because of this.
And the people who, yeah.
And I'll talk about why the work requirement is bullshit when I finish going through this, because I do want to make sure that we get to that. But yeah, this would potentially throw 10 million people off of healthcare. We talked about SNAP. The SNAP would come with a work requirement as well. Which
is something that, I mean, I've experienced when we lived in Iowa. We got SNAP benefits. Now, here's the thing. Nathan was eligible. I was not. Nathan was eligible because he went to school for his graduate degree and he worked as a graduate assistant. I was not, even though I was going to school more than full time. Some people would say, oh, well, even if you're a student, you need to be going to school part-time and working. Side note, that doesn't always work because some universities don't like you to go to school part-time. They really expect you to be going full-time. Also, it delays your time before you can get a job that maybe pays you more. It's also worth noting that if you are, let's say, in a family where one parent works and the other parent doesn't work because they have several young children that they can't actually afford childcare for, it would be more expensive for that other parent to go to work and them to pay for childcare. If you have that kind of experience, then that person is working just at home. They can't just leave their young children alone necessarily. So this is just really biting it out of a lot of people.
Yeah. It also would implement a work reporting requirement. By the way, I should say it's not just a working requirement, it's a work reporting requirement. All right. And that is an important distinction, because people who are working would be required to report how much time they would be working. And in many cases, if a person is working a full or part-time job, the hours that they report might not meet the requirements because they might have inconsistent work schedules, which is very common among low-paid workers. It might be people who are between jobs.
Or people with more than one job.
And also, it creates a bureaucratic hurdle that people are going to need to try to go over, which in many cases, I mean, Jess and I in the past, we've tried to apply for government assistance in the past. The more hurdles, the more means testing they do, the more complicated the process ends up being, and the more of a chance there is for people that would actually on paper be eligible for the requirements to still not be able to get it because it's so fucking complicated.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of issues also with just navigating those application processes and understanding if something changes, how you're supposed to address that. I don't know how this plans to address it, but when we went through getting SNAP benefits, we were sent a letter that said, okay, this is the date and time that you will talk to your case manager and they will tell you the specifics. And then it said, oh yeah, by the way, if you want to talk to them, you can try calling this. But it's not just like you can call that person and they're waiting to answer your phone call. You have to make an appointment, and that could be several weeks out because these people are very overworked. So it's also not that easy. Also, side note, if you work a job where you don't have the ability to pick up your phone and call someone in the middle of the day, you're just SOL.
Yeah. It would also impose a work requirement for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. TANF.
That's TANF, which, I mean, it just all of these programs are really important for obvious reasons. And I just don't understand. I know that this is maybe naive, but I just can't understand people saying, you know what we can't afford to cut is this DOD budget, or like, you know, we can't afford to tax billionaires. But, you know, people who literally might die from not getting their basic needs met, whatever, they don't have money. Those schmucks just need to die and make room for the rest of us. I just don't get that attitude.
Yeah. And by the way, TANF is linked to fewer babies having low birth weights, children and parents being healthier and living longer. Children tend to be less likely to experience abuse and neglect. They're more likely to complete school, and they're more likely to have higher earnings as adults.
Which is important if you only care about money. People completing school and having higher earnings means it stimulates the economy. Also, I would just like anybody who doesn't know a lot about these programs, just look them up. These programs are already restrictive in their means testings. I mean, a lot of the base level income that you have to meet in order to qualify is so low that it's almost comical if anybody has been able to live on that low wage. TANF specifically has very specific lifetime limit benefits where if you've drawn on this, I think it's 5 years. Don't quote me on that, but if you've drawn on, it's for life. It doesn't matter what situation occurs. It doesn't matter what happens in your life. Once you've used up your amount, you've used it up. So it's not as if these programs are something that's already sustainable and that's sustaining people long term. It's not. Yeah.
And in case any of you still think that this has anything to do with protecting the deficit, get this. This would also reduce funding for the IRS.
Well, yes.
Which, what that means is actually less revenue, because more funding to the IRS means that they have more resources to go after billionaire cheats. When they have less funding, they don't go after billionaires as much. In fact, they're more likely to go after lower income people. So they're literally like in that action, in the totality of this, they are giving billionaire cheats to the system a pass so that they can literally take food out of the mouths of children. That is who they are. That is who they work for. And I just want to take a step back. Let's talk about the work requirement. We already talked about some of the issues with that, but I want to steel man the argument for just a second, and then
I'll tear it down. Don't worry about it.
We'll both tear it down. So the argument that Republicans are always making about why there needs to be a work-related requirement on these programs is the idea that if you just allow all these government programs to be given out willy-nilly with no means testing, that people will just be lazy, they will live off the government, they will cheat the system, and they'll just never work.
Excuse me, they're not billionaires.
Good point. That they'll just never work. And, intuitively, in some ways, that argument does make sense. All right. If you are given everything you need, then why would you work for it? And of course, the reason why Republicans say that they want to do this is they're actually being generous, because when you take away that safety net, it forces people to adapt, which means they're more likely to try to better themselves. Hold on. They're more likely to try to better themselves. They're more likely to try to seek a job. They're more likely to go out and get a job because they have to. They're forced to in order to survive. And people are adaptive, which means that, the less help you give them, the more independent they're going to be. So that's the argument. Here's why it's bullshit. First off, we actually do know, based on state level experiments on work requirements for various programs, including Medicaid, including SNAP, that we don't actually see that disincentive for people not to work. On top of that, we also see from experiments regarding universal basic income, which Michael and I have talked about on this pod before, that even when you don't means test it, like when you don't means test government aid or additional aid, financial aid at all, even when you don't means test it, the results are not that people are just lazy. The results are that people actually do try to get a job, but they try to get a better job. All right. So what they found when they did that study in California that we talked about in a previous show, what they found was that the people that were given the temporary universal basic income did actually try to get a job. Even the ones that were unemployed, they did try to get a job, but they actually waited until a job that actually was, number one, fulfilling, but number two, actually had a good compensation to come around before they actually took it, because they had that additional safety net. They could be more sparing about which job they took. So what that means is that when you don't have a work requirement and people have that social safety net, that gives them the ability when they're looking for jobs, and most of them will be looking for jobs, that gives them the ability to not just take the first thing that they desperately need that comes around. See, the argument is when you're desperate, you'll go out and get a job. But the problem with that is that when you're desperate, you will go out and get any job. Even if it's a minimum wage job that has horrible hours and pays you garbage, you'll go out and get it. But if you have a safety net and someone offers you a minimum wage job with terrible hours, you're more likely to be like, fuck that. I'm gonna try to get a better one that's gonna be better for my family.
Which is pretty relevant from the party that says, why are we raising minimum wage? Minimum wage jobs should only be for like high schoolers who are just starting out and who are only doing this to earn some extra cash. They often say, listen, if you can't support your family on that, I don't think you should. I think you should go out and get a better paying job. Now, there are all kinds of issues with that, but if you believe in that premise, if you believe that minimum wage jobs are not meant to support a family, they're just meant for like high schoolers or like someone who just wants a little bit of extra
Which
cash
is not
around
true.
Christmas.
FDR specifically, when he
Yes.
created the minimum wage, he specifically said that no business that relies on paying their workers less than a living wage deserves to exist. He specifically said that. Anybody who says that the minimum wage was originally created for high schoolers or some shit, they're wrong. They're just wrong.
But if you genuinely believe that, oh, minimum wage jobs are for like when you want to pick up an extra job around Christmas for some extra money or for like high school kid, if you believe that, then you would want this because you would say, oh, okay, so this will mean that the only people in those minimum wage jobs are people who don't really need to support themselves or a family. It's only going to be the people who just kind of need it for like developing their skills and getting a little bit of cash.
Yeah, and here's the issue, and here's why I think Republicans really care about this. The more desperate people are for work, the more likely they are to accept a shitty deal. A shitty deal.
They love
in many cases
having serfs. Okay,
Yeah,
conservatives cream themselves over the idea of serfdom. They don't necessarily know what it is, but that's what they really want.
So the point is, this gives those employees less bargaining power because they're so desperate. One of the interesting things that came as a result of the COVID pandemic is that because of the government assistance, people were actually allowed to be more, choosy about what jobs they got when things started opening up. And because of that, businesses actually had to compete to give better pay and better care, better benefits to the people that were applying for these jobs. But the thing is, that's what Republicans don't want, because those are the businesses that are funding their campaigns.
And I think that is in part, this is a retaliation because we are seeing more labor movement. We are seeing laborers with more power. One of the examples in history of when that has happened, when people started to have more power to negotiate their salary, was after the Black Plague.
Yeah.
When there is some type of tragedy that throws society into this kind of chaos, and you have a lot of positions that need to be filled, and all of these businesses need to step up or they're not going to get workers, it advances civilization.
Yeah. So when I see this as a proposal from Republicans, my initial thought is this proposal shows what their priorities are. And any compromise with priorities like this is going to be detrimental. And there is one possible avenue that Biden might actually have in order to avoid a default, which it does come with some complications. And it is possible that there isn't enough time to do it. But, I mean, if Republicans are going to be this bad faith about what they're proposing, I don't see any point in really trying to continue the negotiations. And it seems to me like the best bet is to do this. So
it's like we do not negotiate with terrorists stance.
Basically. So the 14th Amendment. So you probably know the 14th Amendment as that thing that says that states cannot impose on equal protection, cannot violate equal protection under the law, or that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. But there's another part of the 14th Amendment that is relevant to this. All right. The 14th Amendment states, quote, "The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law includes debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion shall not be questioned." What it's saying is that you cannot question whether or not the United States will pay its debts, will incur its debts. The argument is that having a debt ceiling, therefore, is unconstitutional because it is questioning the government's ability to pay its debts. Therefore, the debt limit is unconstitutional.
Eat that, Clarence Thomas.
Now, the issue with that is that, so the Biden administration has said that they don't want to do that, but they're not necessarily taking it off the table, because the problem is, if they did that, there would almost certainly be a lawsuit. And the concern is that if a lawsuit happens, that we don't have enough time for it to be settled before we hit the debt limit, which again, the debt limit, we're predicted to hit it on June 1st, which is like a week from now. So his concern is that we don't have enough time to do it. I would say at this point,
that doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Yeah, at this, well, he's worried that it would sabotage negotiations. Honestly, I think
there's no negotiation.
I think at this point, the negotiations are bad faith, and you should, and this is the best avenue. Now, he did say that the one thing that is off the table is default. So it sounds to me like what he's saying is that if we hit that and there's no deal, there's literally nothing on the table, that's when he would do it. He would do it as a last resort. But honestly, I think at this point, go ahead and do it. And when you do it, fucking dare the Republicans to take you to court. Because if they do try to take you to court, make it clear they're taking, like, the Republican Party is taking me to court for their right to throw the government into a recession. I came up with a solution to prevent us from going into default. They're trying to sue to prevent it from happening. All right?
That's
Turn it
the
around
thing
on them.
consistently that the establishment Democrat fails to do, which is to actually show any kind of, like, chutzpah and fight back. They just consistently go, oh, the Republicans don't want to do this. I don't know what to do. Stop trying to get them to do it. It's not working. I love that the establishment Democratic Party will consistently face these bad faith attempts where the Republicans just hold a metaphorical gun to their heads and say, do it or else. And they don't even try to combat it. They're like, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. It's pathetic, and it's also lazy, and I am fed up with it, as I'm sure many people are.